Hey, welcome back to Timeless Steel Garage. If you're just joining us, we're working on this badass 1964 Buick Riviera with a 425 Nailhead. We're about halfway through the cooling system and timing system restoration. Let's get back into it. And if you're just tuning in, we've already put a brand new roller timing chain in, a new timing cover, and a new water pump. Also a new external harmonic balancer. And now it's time to get the water pipe crossover pipe in and start finishing this up. Let's get to it. All right, here's where we're at. So I'm not trying to go crazy on this restoration, but I couldn't put this rusty iron pipe back in. So Duplicolor engine paint. This paint code is Detroit Diesel Alpine Green. That's Delta Echo 1618. So I got that drying. I did clean up all the surfaces. This spot right here that's all taped up had a bunch of corrosion on it, and that's the spot that's got a seal in the water pump. Also wire brushed the flange where the gasket's got to mate to the block. So I got to let that dry for a couple hours. I threw the pulleys in the parts washer, and I went ahead and threw those pulleys on. They're not tight or anything. I did use the old water pump studs. They've seen better days, but I don't have any, so they'll work. I used the old double nut trick on those, which basically take two nuts that you had bolting your fan on here and just run two nuts on the stud, lock them together, and that lets you back the stud out. I did have to tap one of them. They're slightly bent. It's not ideal, but anyhow, we're going to reuse the studs. The pulley goes on first. On the bottom crank pulley, the pulley goes on, then there's a reinforcement plate, and then the bolts go through those plates. I used some Loctite on those. And then I was messing around with this radiator here, trying to figure out the best sequence, because obviously when we got this car, it was already missing fan shroud, so I wasn't quite sure how it all went together. And it seems like the easiest thing to do is to drop the radiator in first, because you have transmission oil cooler pipes that come out that the fan shroud sits on top of, so the shroud has to come out before you can pull the radiator. So it looks like the easiest thing to do is put the radiator in, then put the fan shroud in, and then tilt the fan through the front of the shroud, secure the fan to the water pump, and then secure the radiator and the fan shroud. Now this reproduction fan shroud that I got is pretty sweet, and you can see those little holes in the bottom. It just sits on the tongs that are already in the car. Since this was an air-conditioned car, it already came equipped with a fan shroud. I think the non-air conditioned cars didn't have fan shrouds, but I'm not sure on that, so don't quote me. The radiator's got corrosion all over it, but it wasn't leaking. So I don't have a new radiator right now, and I don't know if this corrosion is from stuff being spilled all over it in the past, but it's not leaking, so I'm gonna run it for now, keep an eye on it, probably end up having to replace the radiator later. But these are those transmission cooler lines. I had to put that one back in while it's out of the car. So this will go down, transmission cooler lines go on there, and then this shroud sits above those lines like that. So I went ahead and replaced the clutch fan and reused the bolts. The new clutch fan comes with a little shim that goes inside here to make it fit properly. That's pretty much where we're at. I did take this, I've got a lot of hate for this clear fuel filter. This was just a temporary filter I had laying around to get the car running. I'm not putting that back on. These things, you can see this one's already doing it. When they get hot, they start bending and flexing, they crack, they leak, they start cars on fire. I got one of these metal Edelbrock street filters. Just gonna replace it with that. And I'm gonna put this new alternator on still. And then once we get the cooling system done, I'm not going to do anything with the ignition system until the entire cooling system is done. Then we'll go ahead and throw this MSD in. But it's coming together. I want to show you guys something. So you remember I was trying to get this car done as quick as possible because I was trying to get it ready for a road trip, and it wasn't charging well. I was only getting like 12.4 volts consistently. Now here's some things I found. This is a battery disconnect. I yanked on the cable and that popped right out. I did replace the voltage regulator. These aftermarket external regulators are garbage. I mean, sometimes they don't work right out of the box. I think this one is working, but I can't be sure because I haven't tested it. But let's move on over to the alternator. Now, I should have just converted this to a one wire, but because I was trying to get it ready for a trip quickly, I just ordered a cheap new externally regulated alternator. But look what I found here. I mean, these wires are super corroded. The terminals are corroded. Look at that main 12-volt wire going to the starter. It is just roached, and the stud itself is super rusty. So our problem might, this alternator might be working fine and this wiring's corroded, but we're gonna replace the alternator because it was cheap. Alternator looks pretty corroded too, and I'll probably cut this wire back to clean wire, put new wire on it, put good connectors on it. And then once I have the new alternator in, I can see what the voltage is being put out and test everything. But yeah, just start taking old things apart, you find more problems. That's just the way it is. I got a brand new alternator over here. I got this guy from Rock Auto. It's super cheap. 55 amp alternator. It's got the exact same plugs on the back as the one that's in the car. And another thing I noticed here is this ground wire on the back of the alternator is missing a ground. So that could have been a problem too. I don't believe I disconnected that, so that's a fail right there. See, it says ground, which means it should have a ground. So common thing to do with alternators is ground them where they mount to the head of the block and then run a ground from the mount to the car itself. But we'll fix all this. That's another issue I found with the car is the grounds on the block and the transmission are super corroded, so it's not getting a good ground. So I'll probably make some 4-gauge cable and run new grounds on the block. All those things tie into whether your alternator works, whether your headlights are bright, whether your ignition runs well, all that stuff. So, all right, so the old alternator's off. I had to take the pulley off the new alternator and swap it with the dual belt pulley from the car. That's easy, just use an impact. Looking at the old alternator, the main bearing in it's got quite a bit of play. And if you look inside at the brushes, they got that old copper look to them. They're pretty worn out. Alternator's just got a lot of slop in it. So multiple problems in the charging system, but the alternator definitely needs to be replaced. The wire's got to get cleaned up. There's not adequate grounds in the system. The block needs grounds. So we'll get that all taken care of. New pulley, or the old pulley off the rivs back on here. And the way this car works, it uses 3 belts. So the crank has 2 belts going from the water pump up to the alternator and over the AC compressor because it's an AC car. And then there's a single belt on the front of the water pump snout that drives the power steering pump. All right, well, I'm waiting on paint to dry and my face apparently, but went ahead and got the fuel pump back in, put that gasket on the same way I showed you guys before. This is a brand new machine surface. That's a new fuel pump. So a gasket tacked one side, put RTV, a little bit of RTV on the other side of the gasket. So I'm waiting for this bracket to dry. I'm waiting for the crossover pipe to dry. I've already switched the alternator over. That's ready to go. Clutch fans rebuilt, radiators ready to go in, new shrouds ready to go in. We're really just waiting on paint. And once that stuff's dry, we'll install the crossover pipe, put the new O-ring on top of the timing chain housing, put the new gaskets on each side. Thermostat housing, alternator bracket, AC compressor, power steering pump brackets, drop the radiator in, drop the fan shroud in, drop the new clutch fan in, and then assemble all that together. And then we're at the point of reconnecting fuel lines, coolant lines, putting cooling in it. Once the coolant system pressure tests okay, we'll go ahead and pull the distributor out and the spark plug wires and put the new MSD unit in. Top of the morning to you. I got to mow in the yard and hanging out with my kid yesterday and never came back to the shop. But this thing, I ain't leaving the shop till it's done today. So it's go time. All right, here we go. Every time I try to paint brackets on this motor, it turns out terrible. If I ever take this thing out of here, I'll probably sandblast the brackets and just have them powder coated. But I wasn't going crazy. I just wanted to put some paint on there because I had it out. I will say some technique. I tried to be lazy and leave the AC compressor mounted over there. Just go ahead when you're taking everything apart. Just pull the power steering pump, pull the AC compressor. I didn't have to disconnect the lines on the power steering pump, but I had to at least move it to the side. And then this crossover pipe here, it has an O-ring that goes on the bottom. Put some RTV on that. Got RTV on the gaskets that go to the block. And then I tapped the block, chased all the threads. I got a new 180 thermostat here. I did screw up when I left the power steering bracket off, so I'm gonna have to mess with the power steering to get that right. And so next step here, I'm gonna clean up the old thermostat housing and put a new gasket on it. I will say the gasket that Centerville Auto sends with his gasket kit is a lot better. So this is a Felpro gasket that I got on the internet that's supposed to fit a 64, and this is the one that Centerville sent, and it fits this a lot better. So I recommend getting that gasket from Centerville. I just got his whole front assembly gasket kit, and it's literally come with everything I need. He sends it in a bag, even comes with new seals if you're using the old timing cover. So anyhow, next step, thermostat housing. All right, so all the cooling system stuff is back in the car, and it went together just like I told you guys earlier. Radiator in, connect the automatic trans cooler lines, put the radiator bracket on loosely so you can move the radiator around, slide the fan shroud in, and then put the fan in after that. The fan shroud, I had to, the factory bracket here, maybe the reason the previous owner took the shroud off was the bracket was stripped. There was no threads. So I tapped to a next bigger size, which was 5/16 by 18. And I had to drill a hole in the fan shroud to clear that bigger bolt. And I found that the radiator tilted all the way forward gives the best clearance for the fan. I don't hear any touching. And really, like, I put this on here for cooling effect, but also really safety. It's so easy when you're working on a car to put your arms into a fan or your hands into a fan. And this being my wife's car, you know, God forbid she breaks down somewhere. I just don't want anything to happen. So I put this on for safety. So yeah, the cooling system, all we got to do now is hook up hoses, pressurize the system, put coolant in it. Hopefully we don't have any leaks. Once that's done, I'm going to move on to alternator and changing the spark plug wires out to modern wires and putting that modern MSD distributor in. Then I'll go back through and final check everything, and we'll crank this thing. All right, got a bunch done here. Let's catch you guys up. So, power steering pumps in, coolant system. As you just saw, I bled the system with a pressure bleeder with the air compressor to get all the bubbles out of the block, and then topped off the radiator. I replaced the terrible clear fuel filters that tend to crack and cause fires with this little metal Edelbrock one. I've got all new radiator hoses. I did reuse the clamps. I've got a new thermostat. I've got a heater bypass. Eventually I got to replace that heater core. I'm not doing that now. This air conditioning doesn't work, but I'm going to continue to use it because of the pulleys on the compressor, and eventually I'll get rid of all that and put vintage air in because she wants air conditioning, and trying to maintain this system is just not cost effective anymore, and it's hard. But I almost got lazy, and then I could hear my brother in the corner of my ear, even though he's not here, saying, if you don't do it, you're going to regret it. and I was gonna just leave the distributor in and get it running and then do the distributor another weekend, but I already got the compressor out, so it just makes sense to do it now. I've got the external balancer on top dead center, if you can see the yellow line down there, and it does confirm with where the rotor is pointing, which is kind of the 7 to 8 o'clock on the Buick motor, because this is the #1 cylinder. So I'm going to pop that distributor out and then open up that MSD box, read the instructions. The good thing is Matt at Centerville Auto, he's already dealt with these, and it comes with different springs in advance, and he's got the magic setup from all the times he's installed that distributor. So I'm going to get that thing out of the box and use Matt's recommendations on the advanced springs and then drop it in. And really the only thing tricky about these Buick distributors is they kind of go in at an angle this way, and it's really easy to have it look like it's fully seated but have it not be engaged with the oil pump, which is bad. And I actually had an issue when I put this distributor in, because this I pulled this distributor out to rebuild it, and I ended up having to use an old distributor gear to kind of turn the oil pump. You can do it with a long flathead screwdriver, and my neighbor Dennis and I, we eventually got it, and we got it seated in there, but got to be real careful with that on a Buick. So I'll be back. All right, so this is what I took out of the distributor per Matt's instructions. It comes with this purple limit bushing and 2 heavy silver springs. I damaged the spring taking it out, so be careful. And I put, per his recommendations, 1 thin silver, 1 heavy silver on the advanced springs. And then the limit bushing is right here where that lock nut is. And the black bushing that he recommends putting in is a wider diameter than the purple one that it comes with. So basically, if I'm understanding his input here, he's made it so that the advanced springs advance quicker, but that the limit spring limits overall advance more than what the factory distributor or what MSD sends it at. So he's a pretty smart guy, so I'm going to run with it and give it a try, see how it goes. And while we're talking about it, do not put these clear plastic filters on your carbureted classic car, because there's some confusion. I put this on the car back when I had issues with the Sniper, because I had one on the shelf, and it was to just get the car running. Now if you look at this thing, I drove the car twice, well, twice in the same day, and the heat from the top of the motor melted these to where they've drooped. It's very thin plastic, they tend to crack, they're just dangerous. So if you put this on the car, don't put it over the top of the motor, but I recommend not using them at all. Again, I didn't mention it in the previous video, but I should have. This was just to get the car running because I had it. But we went ahead and changed out with a metal Edelbrock cleanable fuel filter. Heat's not going to affect that thing. And even this is not preferred. I've got a rubber fuel line. Eventually I'm going to make a metal one, just because metal, when coming from the fuel pump up to the motor, is just a little bit safer. You don't have to worry about rubber chafing or getting hot. So I'm still not happy with this, but it's better than that clear plastic filter. So next step here is to get the new distributor in the motor. All right, here we are. So I went ahead and had to rewire the alternator. I cut the wiring back till I got good wire, and then I made a new 12-inch pigtail, gutted the plug on the alternator, rewired everything. I added a 4-gauge ground to the alternator bracket to the intake. I also put a ground on the alternator like it's supposed to have. Brand new belts, brand new alternator, MSD Blaster 2 coil, just because it recommended it with the MSD distributor. I doubt that it's any better, but whatever. The distributor's in. I just tried to fire it. It does fire. I got to get the timing. But fixed a lot of wiring problems. Disregard this. This was a test thing, but ditched that cable, put a new cable on here. I got a new drain overflow on the radiator. All new plug wires. And that's pretty much it for now. I mean, there's still some tidying up to do, obviously. Got to clean up the plug wires and some other wiring in here. But that's it. Success. And I did have it running for like 2 minutes. And we don't have any leaks, at least not yet. So that's a win. Thanks for tuning in to Time of Steel Garage. I think I'm on my 5th outfit change today. Super hot, but we'll see you next time.